traditionally it's common to have it like outside of a house or a ski house, and they would have these sliding doors or windows, so you can kind of get rid of the line in between inside and outside. Kind of this Buddhism and other opposites, but they're actually not the same. This specific garden, their theme is like the four seasons, so different things represent all four seasons, and they're opposites, but they're all kind of within the same subject. There's a cherry blossom tree, which is represents spring and growth. They use gravel or sand to represent water. A lot of the times they're also called like dry gardens. And so that kind of represents summer. And you can see in the middle here, there's the circle and this gourd shape. And that kind of represents the sake in the gourd, or it's the cup. And that can kind of symbolize the rest of teachings and learning from the teacher or the knowledge to the students. So I thought that was really cool. And for fall, they have these really pretty Japanese maple trees. And back here, you can kind of see these black pine trees to represent my faith. There's also different objects that have different symbolisms. There's things like lanterns and stuff that can represent enlightenment and inner peace, stuff like that. Then the next one, which I thought was really cool, was this sand and stone garden. These are really common. They would be just like part of monasteries and places. You can see like these old walls they have around it. Same thing, right? This gravel and sand represents water, and then the stones can either represent islands or mountains. If you read the Waters and Mountain Sutra, right, this would make a lot of sense. And these are actually called contemplation gardens, so they're not used for meditation. They're actually used to purposely contemplate things. So kind of like what Dogen says when he's like, "Oh, you should think about these things." This is kind of a tool that they would use in order to do that. So they'd have benches or mats where they could come and sit and look at them to contemplate. You can see they would rake different patterns in the sand or gravel. The circles can kind of represent unity or like pratitya samudra, all as one. And the act of raking the gravel and sand itself can kind of be seen as meditative, right? They would go out and do that every morning, take care of the gardens, rake this gravel, kind of get into that flow state, kind of. This specific garden has a story behind it. It's kind of from like an old sutra where there are 7 tigers in a ravine, and the Buddha, represented by this one big rock, walks past them and sees that they're starving and kind of throws himself into the ravine to feed them. Classic Buddha story, kind of representing compassion. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. Thank you. Did you take these pictures?
No, they have a cool website. You can actually go on a virtual tour of all of their gardens and kind of look around. I definitely recommend it. They have explanations of things.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, looking at pretty.
What?
This
is
your go-to question? Yeah, that's my go-to question. You got a problem with that?
No, that's really cool. I mean, the point Wes made about how you can see in the architecture, you can even see like the philosophy manifest in the architecture. There's there are people who work on like philosophy of architecture in aesthetics. Probably the most famous example is Hegel writes about how cathedrals, like Christian cathedrals, represent Christianity, because in Christianity, what do you have in a cathedral? You have a firm separation between the outside and the inside, right? Between the world and the kingdom, between the body and the soul. And a cathedral has this very dark, the idea is to block out all the light from getting in. The only light that's allowed to come into a cathedral comes through stained glass windows, meaning it's filtered, meaning it's purified, meaning it's redeemed. And then when you go into a cathedral, it's designed to pull your attention up to God. And Hegel contrasts this with Greek temples. But you could add in a third point of comparison, which would be like Buddhist temples, for example, where the walls are traditionally made out of what? Paper. Right? What does paper do? Well, it does separate the inside from the outside, but not the way that like bricks do. Right? There's a translucence there. The light comes in through the paper, and so instead of having the light beam in through a specific narrow entrance, there's a sort of diffuse glow all around you instead. That kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. And that the walls literally can move. Like you can roll the walls out of the way. Talk about impermanence. Yeah. All right. So, sorry, I'm still trying to do attendance. I was looking at pretty pictures. Keaton, Zane, Wes, Heather, Claire, Justin, Michael, Jules, not here. Lindsay, not here. Locke, Green, Riker, Isaac, Aaliyah, Connor, alive, I hope, somewhere. Don't know though. Jonathan, Corinne, Jaden. Okay. So, just while I'm thinking of it, before we all leave, to make sure that I say it. For next week, we're going to keep reading Dogen. In this book, open up the table of contents, and I'm going to tell you what I want you to read. So we kind of read it out loud together, but under part 1, the very first section, Rules for Zazen, right, on page 29, put a mark next to that one. I'd like you to read it. We read it together. You don't have to go through it again, but you saw it was very short. Optional under that section is Bodhisattva's 4 methods of guidance. Also in part 1, that's optional. Look at it if you have time, skim through it, whatever. Under part 2, philosophical works, you need to read The Time Being. That is the main one that I want you to read. That's going to be Dogen's explicit treatment of time. And so we were sort of talking on Monday about what would you do if on the final I asked you, and this is a good sign that I will, to explain the Buddhist idea of living in the present or be in the moment. What does that mean? I said, do you think you could actually philosophically explain that without sounding like a New Age stoner?
I tried.
This essay will you were brave enough to try. Yes, that is more credit than some people did. But this essay will help with that. So that is required, the time being. In part 3, we've already read the Mountains and Waters Sutra, right? I would like you to read Plum Blossoms and the Moon. Painting of a rice cake is delightful, but I'm not requiring it. Part 4, we're not going to read any of them. And in part 5, read both of those. The Waka poems and the Chinese style poems. Okay?
For next week, you said the moon and...
Oh no, all those for next week.
I don't like to bring my books to school.
You should bring your books to school. What would you do if I asked you to read page 30 right now?
Cry.
Seriously, the books are required. Bring the books. Yeah, so read those for next week. There, as you've seen, a lot of them are quite short. As you've also seen, Dogen can also be very dense. So don't wait till like Sunday night. But 2 of the sections I've asked you to read are poems. I'm not saying don't spend time reading them carefully and thinking about them, but I'm saying they're not taking up thousands of pages. They're short poems. Yeah.
Could you say, sorry.
Yep.
Could you just say all the ones you want? I'm just really
Yes.
personalized.
So in part 1, read Rules for Zazen and Bodhisattva's 4 methods of guidance. That one's optional. In part 2, read The Time Being. In part 3, read Plum Blossoms and the Moon. And then read all of part 5. The Chinese style poems are, some of you have done a little bit of classical Chinese poetry with me. That's what those are. Dogen wrote them in classical Chinese. The Waka poems are written in his native Japanese. So if you can notice like differences between them, that could be what we're talking about. Leisha, what was your question? All right, so that's for next week. And then, David, I was ignoring your email, but the reason I was ignoring your email is because I could send you the syllabus as it exists on Canvas now, but it I mean, I think I've altered it almost every week of the semester, so. For next week, that Dogen. We'll see how next week goes. We'll either spend another class period on Dogen after that, or we'll move on to Basho. We'll just kind of see how it goes and see what you guys feel like doing. Okay? Any other questions? Everybody except Kenneth has gotten their paper proposals back. Yours was the longest.
In a good or bad way? You can say both.
I think good. Yeah. The Wi-Fi went out on the train this morning before I could completely finish it and send it back to you. Because the train was not only 25 minutes late, the Wi-Fi was also out. Yeah. I was about to text all my IAs, only one of whom was actually in the first section today, and be like, I might be late, you might have to lecture on Marx. And you're the only one who was there,
Yeah.
so it would have been you.
I would have started to cry.
As long as you, through the tears, lectured on Marx, that would be fine. Anyway, so everybody has, and you'll get yours, but everyone has gotten their paper proposals back. I told this to most of you individually, but some of you I said, my suggestion is maybe just do the exam. I don't know if this was specific enough. If you have like a genuine problem with my feedback, like let me know. I'm open to negotiating. As I have said before, it's not a democracy, but I value your input. I'm open to being nudged. But for those people, if you are continuing with the paper, remember there's nothing required next week. The week after that, I'll want the bibliography, which I have little instructions for. It's on Canvas. And if you're not doing the paper, then don't worry about it for the final. We'll talk more about the final 3 or 4 weeks. This is week 11. So we've got 12, 13, 14, Thanksgiving, 16. We've got 4 weeks left. Yeah, and we're done. Wildly, somehow. This has been like the fastest semester I think I've ever had.
Yeah.
So my tentative plan is we'll do Dogen next week. If we all feel, good-ish, we'll move on. That's what I'm kind of hoping happens, but if it doesn't, then it doesn't, and that's okay. But we'll do Dogen next week. The week after that, we'll do Basho, which is lovely because it's like travel writing and haiku, and it's lovely to read and very entertaining. And we'll do, again, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks of Basho. Then we'll do a week on, we'll really have 2 weeks, but we'll start a week on kind of Buddhism and modernity, how Buddhism gets used in some critical theories, how Buddhism gets used by capitalism or abused by capitalism. We'll talk about that for a week. And then we'll have break and we'll come back and we'll do our last week on Byung-Chul Han, the book I asked you to get, Zen Buddhist philosophy. And so he's a contemporary philosopher who usually works in Western tradition on kind of a Heideggerian and Marxism sort of line, talking about Buddhism. So that's the plan. We'll see how it goes. Don't hold me to it. All right. Any questions on anything? Okay, go ahead. So we kind of started on Monday and then shockingly didn't manage to resolve the question that kind of sent Dogen towards Zen and away from Tentai, which was what? Anyone? Rephrase Dogen's question? Yeah, Locke? Since I saw you first.
People are already enlightened, why don't they act like it?
Yeah, if people are already enlightened, right? Why don't they act like it? And that basic question or that basic problem for Dogen, I hope that you're starting to be able to see all the Buddhist history that goes into that question. So that question should maybe, at the very least, make you think of the Trikaya, right? The 3 bodies. This is one of the core teachings, if you remember, I hope this is familiar, of Mahayana Buddhism, that the Buddha is no longer one historical person. Buddha now has 3 bodies, or 3 versions, right? So there's the historical Buddhas, like Siddhartha himself, but also like Lao Tzu, or Confucius, or Jesus, right? They're all historical Buddhas. And then the second type of Buddha would be the kind of cosmic Buddha, which we might think of as like gods or supernatural beings. And then the third kind is the Buddha nature, right? Or Buddhahood or Buddha-ness or the Buddha force. The idea that the Buddha is some kind of, force, I don't know. It's kind of something in things, right? And that this is a Mahayana idea. But we read in Zipperin, remember, Zipperin says, yeah, this is a Mahayana idea, but even though Mahayana develops in India, it's an idea that didn't really come to its full fruition until Buddhism gets to China. Because Chinese language, Chinese writing, Chinese philosophy has a lot of wiggle room that Indian language and philosophy doesn't have. Even like on a grammatical level, right? That Chinese language allows for things like, yeah, it's singular and plural at the same time. It's one and it's many. Wait, what? So that kind of ambiguity, which fits Buddhism pretty well. Zipperin says Buddhism kind of developed in the wrong place, is what he said. Hopefully you can now see some of these tensions showing up later in Dogen's question. Because we said at the time, oh, well, this Buddha nature, this third kind of Buddha body, sort of feels a little bit like Brahman, like Hinduism, like the idea of the absolute, like this eternal substance that's in all things. Isn't that what Buddhism is trying to get away from? And if, in fact, here's Dogen's question, if, in fact, there is Buddha nature in everything, then why isn't everything acting like a Buddha? Like, what's up with all the Nazis? What's going on, right? That's Dogen's question. So I hope you can kind of see how the things you've learned this semester, hopefully, if you have in fact, if I may flatter myself that you have learned something, I hope you can see how they're like stacking and that thinkers in later points in history are actually in a conversation with earlier thinkers. So that's Dogen's basic question, and we didn't really solve it. So does anyone have an answer? The hope is that we'll work towards the answer by the end of today, but does anyone have an answer?
Well, how's this?
I don't know, I'll let you know.
It's not that everyone is enlightened, but everyone has the potential to be enlightened, and that's the same thing.
Okay, good. So that is not Dogen's answer, but I'm glad you said it. Because that is the answer to a lot of other Buddhists. That is their answer, right? We, for example, saw in Huineng, right? Who's Huineng?
Sixth patriarch.
The sixth patriarch of Chan Buddhism, the supposed author of the Platform Sutra, right? Someone tell me a little bit about Huineng's view of enlightenment. Anybody want to raise their hand and take a whack at that? Yeah, thanks.
Didn't he advocate more for like instantaneous enlightenment, where it was kind of like whack, you're enlightened?
Yeah.
I mean, Dogen definitely leans more towards gradual enlightenment, so I do think that would play some role in this, that we're just different levels of enlightened, so the Nazis just happen to be less enlightened than everyone else.
Okay, good. Yeah, Thane, do you want to add on?
No, that's pretty much what I was going to say. It's sudden enlightenment.
Yeah. What's the story behind Huineng? Like, how did he become Huineng? How did he become who he is? Like, there's philosophical significance to that story. Yeah, Connor and Heather?
Besides Wei Han, I think the idea that why no one is enlightened or bodhisattva or something, I think it has to do with the human condition, like the idea that we're just so into ourselves that we can't see beyond what the Buddha is.
I think that could be a fair explanation. I don't think it satisfies Dogen, right? Because Dogen is saying, I think Dogen would accuse you of begging the question, right? By which I mean, you're saying, well, maybe we all have Buddha nature, but we're also self-absorbed that the Buddha nature doesn't shine through. Dogen would say, right, that's my question. If we all have Buddha nature, then why are we all still so self-absorbed? So I think you're articulating his question. I don't think he'd be okay with leaving it there, if that makes sense. Yeah, Heather, what were you going to add about Huineng?
I was talking about Huineng.
Yeah.
Is this a story of them sitting with the master writing poetry? Huineng was an uneducated,
Illiterate.
illiterate man who,
Woodcutter.
yeah, the dude was a manual labor. And the master brought them together and said that whoever composed the poem was understood the Buddha.
Yeah, I'm old as shit. I'm gonna die soon.
Who's going to be the next?
Whoever composes the best poem
Right,
will become
exactly.
the new
And then
master.
it turns out it's Huineng.
Yeah.
Even though you have all these acolytes that have been studying forever and a day in the monastery, and they're all expecting to take over from the master, and it's this illiterate woodcarver who manages to capture the essence of everything in his writing, and that's how he became the sixth patriarch.
Yeah, and that his story goes to the philosophical point of sudden enlightenment, right? Who's the one that, it turns out, gets to inherit the dharma of the master? It's the guy who hasn't studied his whole life. It's the guy who can't read or write. It's the guy who showed up to the monastery already as a grown-up, who just heard the Diamond Sutra one day and was like, oh, that's cool, I guess I'll go here, right? That's a kind of, I mean, the promotion of Huineng from not even an ordained monk to the master, the patriarch, that's a kind of sudden enlightenment, right? And that, if you remember, the poem competition happens at night on the walls of the monastery, right? That his rival, who is expected to become the new patriarch, wrote a poem on the wall, and Huineng was like, oh, I can't read it. Can someone read it to me? And he's like, oh, that's pretty good. Could you write mine over there? And that the difference between them, if you remember, was the first guy's poem talks about the Buddha nature is like a dirty mirror, and you have to clean it off to let the Buddha nature shine through. And Huineng's poem is like, no, the dust on the mirror is also Buddha nature. It's already there. You don't have to clear it off at all. And the fifth patriarch is like, yeah, he's got it. That's exactly right. This idea that there's a kind of sudden enlightenment that can happen at any moment, even if you're covered with dust, even if you're illiterate, even if you're a woodworker, even if you're not an ordained Buddhist monk. And that's the kind of beginning split in Zen between gradual and sudden enlightenment, right? And you'll remember that Huineng has to run away because the other monks are going to kill him, as good Buddhists do. And so he runs away to the south, and so southern Chan, all the southern schools of Chan, become the kind of sudden enlightenment, and the northern ones become gradual enlightenment. But what happened historically was that the northern schools also then started to die out. And so the strain of Chan that became popular and spread more, including spread to Japan, was sudden enlightenment. And so this is kind of what Dogen has a problem with. Again, he's like, well, if everything is Buddha, if even the dust is Buddha nature, and you don't have to do any cleaning, then again, what the hell? Like, why are there all these, really? Really? And you can see a dissatisfaction with Tiantai. Hitler is good from a certain point of view. The dust is already clean. Really? But then, what? Dogen's having problems with this. And so he goes to China, and what he does in China is he spends several years there, and he comes back to Japan, and he's like, yeah, nuts to this sudden enlightenment shit. He rejects it. So this idea that okay, well maybe what Dogen is saying is, maybe the answer to his question is, well, we all have the potential in us, but it has to be brought out. I mean, we're moving closer, but I don't think that's quite his answer yet. Thoughts or questions at this point? Yeah.
I mean, it almost sounds like I'm making this connection that I don't remember if I made it before, but with the two poems, it almost sounds like the difference between I get this, I'm wrong a lot, and then the difference between like almost having to clear it away to see the boundary versus like, well, everything is already has a Buddha nature, but then if each individual thing has its own Buddha nature, then are those normalized, and is that really, I don't know, I'm formulating a thought, I think, it's that big.
Okay, that's fair,
So if
you're
anyone
allowed.
wants to like jump off of that, I don't know.
I'm gonna go on a limb and be aggressive and say I don't think you answered Dogan's question yet.
No,
Okay.
I wasn't trying to.
So aggressive.
I know.
I wasn't trying to.
Yeah, kind of, and are you?
I'm like in between.
All right, we'll see,
Yeah.
maybe green and then lock, we'll see how that goes, go ahead.
It seems, I'm not sure, because if he's talking about like potential, like, all these steps, like, kind of, to it, it's kind of like saying, like, we all have to, like, live it, right, until we get closer to it, and there's a certain point where it's like, now we've reached it, but if that's like, that's what I'm imagining it to be. If that's the case, then like, what if you just like push too hard and like get killed by the, like, on the bench, like, you know? Like, is there like
Right.
a moment in time where you can like push yourself too far where you're not, then like it's actually more detrimental to you? You're like, I'm trying so hard to become enlightened that now I'm like not enlightened anymore, like I'm worse off because I've been trying so hard, so it's like, is there like, if he's focused on like the gradual, then like, is there a way where it's, is there a limit to it? Like, you can like push too far, or is it like a perfect medium, so you have to like land it? And is that medium change for each person? I don't know any of those.
I think those are good questions. I mean, one way to rephrase part of it is, how do you try not to try, right? And I mean, this is sort of the central problem of Wu Wei, right? That's the question you should run into, is how do you try not to try? If you're trying not to try, then doesn't the attempt contaminate the end product? Or, you know, in Kenny's terms, if you're trying to lift a lot of really heavy weight, and you're putting a lot of effort, meaning you're lifting something that's heavier than you can actually lift, right? Because that's where the effort comes from. If you're lifting something that's really easy, there's no effort. So the more you're trying, the more effort you put in, could that contaminate the end process by pulling a muscle, or falling on your trachea, or killing, whatever? Like, can the effort contaminate the end process? Yeah, I mean, that's a major question with, I mean, Zen, with Buddhism generally. So yeah, I think you're asking the right question. Green?
I guess that something that I wanted to talk a little bit about was the Tiantai influence kind of at large. So we talked the other day about the mountains walking.
Yeah.
And something that I wanted to kind of talk about was like like if we were to take the perspective, the Tiantai perspective of like the omnicentral holism.
Yeah.
The fact that the mountains are big and non-moving means that they are also moving, right? Because of the fact that they are
small.
And that they're small, yeah. And I think that there's an interesting motion that he kind of sets up, because he talks about, of course, mountains and water in the Mountains and Water Sutra. What a surprise. But what's interesting is on page 101, section 11, he really dives into this notion of water. Forgive the pun. But he says, water is neither strong nor weak, neither wet nor dry, neither moving nor cold, neither moving nor still, neither hot nor cold, neither existent nor non-existent. He does a whole lot of comparatives between water. And he seems to be really pushing this notion that what's fascinating about water is that it is so unbelievably defined by either its presence or not presence. And, you know, if it's frozen, we refer to it as ice. If it's water itself, and it's water. If it's, and then he takes great pains to talk about the upward motion of it as well. He does that several times in section 14 and in 15 as well.
Yeah.
But something that I wanted to note is he kind of making the statement that enlightenment itself is almost like that water, right? So like when it can move up, right? So people can maybe become more or less enlightened, whatever the direction is that we would say is the enlightened direction, right? But then it can also rain, and if it rains, it hits the ground, and if it hits the ground really high up, it's on top of mountains, that sort of thing, right? And so it's further away from where water wants to collect, has a tendency to collect at least.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's also in these like particular droplet forms, but then there can be a collection of more and less, and it seems to be hugely defined by where it is, and the way that we determine what it is
Mhm.
that kind of what he's saying enlightenment is? Would that be kind of what he's getting at? That it's almost a natural movement, which is defined by whoever's around?
I think short answer, yes.
Okay,
For all the reasons you said.
okay.
And you can see that water might be a particularly good example to say, talk about tentai things.
Yeah.
Because, well, make a claim, right?
Mhm.
Water has a tendency to go down.
Mhm.
Unless it's steam,
Yes.
which has a tendency to go up.
Mhm.
Right? So every claim becomes true or false, becomes coherent or incoherent based on the perspective of the people making it, right?
Yeah.
When you limit yourself to saying, but water heated to a certain temperature does what? It goes up. Okay, but now zoom out. Does it always do that? Oh, no. And so, yeah, I think the tentai influence, I think, is particularly strong there. And I think also the idea that that can be analogous to enlightenment is probably pretty good there. So, yeah, that makes sense to me. Locke, and then David and Thane.
Yeah, I think green is on the right path. I kind of went to the imagery of like a mountains flowing as well, and so like I almost want to say that to Dogen, the idea of gradual enlightenment as this like answer isn't because that like it's an end goal, but that enlightenment is an experience of both stillness and moving, and so that is experienced as a kind of gradual motion, maybe.
What does it mean that enlightenment is an experience of stillness and moving? That sounds important.
Let's see, where's a good place that you can look at? Like, that's like sort of the root of like his silent illumination Zen, but it's also like why he's talking about the stillness of like a mountain. Right? That seems like the significance of the mountain is that we normally think of them as like these still high things that can't move. But then when you walk through it, you realize that they move with you too. I don't know.
I don't think you're wrong or anything. I'm just
very hard to
it's an abstract idea that I just I want more fleshed out. But yeah, that might work. I have no problem with that. David and Thane and then Keaton.
I was just gonna say in the same section, so in 13, it says, Buddha said, all things are ultimately liberated, there is nowhere they abide. You should know that even though all things are liberated, not tied to anything, they abide in their own phenomenal expression. However, when most human beings see water, they only see that it flows unceasingly. This is limited human view. There are actually many kinds of flowing. And I guess in this whole section, I didn't quite view the water metaphor here as water being enlightenment so much. Like in the next, on 104, he says, you know, when dragons and fish see water as a palace, it's just like human beings seeing a palace, they don't think it flows. But then, you know, we look at water and we don't see a palace. And so it's, then he says, you know, you who study with Buddha should not be limited to human beings when you are studying water. Yeah. So I think it might be something like the reason why we're not all ready, or we are already enlightened, but simultaneously don't act like it, is just because we have this limited perspective of what is going on in the moment, where we only think about it relative to ourselves and not to how it's experienced by, like a lot of this section is talking about how, you know, yes, every different being sees the universe in different ways. There's a example with like hungry ghosts see water as raging fire, and you know, stuff like that. So I think that Buddha, or an enlightened mind, maybe somehow. I mean, when we were talking about Tantai a couple weeks ago, we said sort of like a view from everywhere is sort of what enlightenment looks like. So I wonder if that's what he's getting at, and it's cultivating that, and that happens gradually.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know.
I think that's spot on, and I think, you know, if I were looking at that, especially what David just said, I'm hearing like echoes of the Lotus Sutra, right? Remember, the whole point from the Lotus Sutra was, you are all bodhisattvas, right? Remember the dolphin seminars and teaching people how to speak dolphin, and then the trick at the end is there is no dolphin society. You're all dolphin masters already, right? And that's the whole Lotus Sutra thing, is that Well, from a certain point of view in time, at a certain point in time, somewhere you are a bodhisattva, even if you're not right now. And that what makes someone a bodhisattva, an awakened bodhisattva, which is what bodhisattva means, it means awakened one, is that the bodhisattva is someone who can see all those paths, right? The bodhisattva is someone who can, if you need to think about it this way, who can see all the different timelines, all the different multiverses all at once. And so, yeah, and so like knows enough because he can see all of this to act accordingly. That's why like, I think it was Isaac's question, who was like, well look, if I'm a bodhisattva, then great. I have the wisdom, I can see all the timelines, and I know, should I just kill Hitler? And like for a bodhisattva, there's an answer to that question. But like, what about for those of us who aren't necessarily awakened bodhisattvas right now? What are we supposed to do? I think that was you, right? Yeah. So I think you're right to like see Tentai here. All things are ultimately liberated. The word ultimately seems to be doing a lot of work there. Ultimately from a certain point of view. Or maybe for Tentai, a better way to put it would be from no point of view, or from all points of view, and because it's from all points of view, it's from, there it is, right? If something is happening from every point of view at the same time, then it's also happening from no point of view, right? Yeah, think, and then keep, and then pedal.
What I have to say kind of sounds stupid.
Then say it.
We could say something stupid about what David said if you want, just to like bring things down a little.
No.
I thought it was pretty good, but like, I don't know, it'll make you feel better.
I was just being a little self-deprecating, because I only got this book arrived in the mail yesterday, so I was only able to get through like half of the Mountains and Water Sutra.
Oh, you should have told me. I would have sent you one.
Oh.
Like I have PDFs of it and stuff. I would have sent you one.
Well,
Ask. You will sometimes receive.
Okay. So I was reading Mountains Are Walking while I was walking actually, and I was.
Is this not the best week to read this? By the way, the mountains are incredible this week. Now that it's gotten cold and cloudy, like my God, what a perfect week to read this. Yeah.
So I was walking down the hallway actually. I was reading Mountains Are Walking, and so I thought, okay, hold on. I know we discussed this in class, but how am I supposed to understand this? And I got thinking about like frames of reference.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know why my mind always goes to like physics, but like in physics, you have a certain frame of reference. Like you punch the table, and there's an equal and opposite reaction. The table punches you, and so in the Mountains of Lotus. In the mountains.
There are probably lotuses in the mountains.
In the.
You didn't have to laugh at that. That was sweet, but that's all right.
That might have been nervous laughter.
That's and now you're like, stop, Ryan. What are you doing?
In the Mountains and Water Sutra, he kind of mentions like you are also walking through the mountains as well.
Yeah.
So I was while I was walking through a hallway, I was instead of imagining myself walking through this hallway, I was imagining the hallway walking through me.
Yeah.
That's probably the wrong word for that, but like that. So there really is no difference in between these two sorts of conventional truths, and so I don't know, is that zooming out? I didn't really feel like it was zooming out. I feel like it was sort of, yeah, now that I rethink about it, I think it is sort of like zooming in.
Yeah, zooming out in the sense that you're allowing another perspective to come into your way of thinking about it, which I think lines up really well with what David was saying.
Yeah.
That from a particular point of view, from a particular ordinary perspective, the mountains don't move. Or the part David read, that we tend to think of all water as being a flowing thing. But I mean, if you're looking at it from the point of view of like, I don't know.
Water in a cup?
Yeah, or I was gonna get even more ridiculous. I was gonna say like, I don't know, the Andes Mountains or something down the coast of South America. From their point of view, the ocean doesn't flow. It's just this big puddle of water that's sitting right there. Right? Which is ridiculous, but also,
Or
From a
like
certain
from
point of
the point of view of a single molecule of water in the ocean, waves aren't a thing. It's just the molecules moving up and down. There's
Yeah.
no actual movement going on there.
yeah. Yeah, that doesn't sound ridiculous at all. Well done. Keaton, and then Ella. You don't have to clap. Sorry, snaps.
So, for a second, I was actually really struggling to clarify what part of this question we're having a problem with.
Okay, good.
As
That's
in,
one way to
like-
solve a problem.
Well, yeah, like, is it that everything doesn't have human nature, or is it just that, like, there's a problem in that nature being realized? But it kind of, like, from what everyone else is saying in some of the texts, it seems like he does agree that everything has a human nature. Just, he's wondering why it's not enlightened. Is that right? Like, what everyone else thinks? I mean,
I think in some sense it has to be. I mean, the part David read again is great for this, at the bottom of 102, right? Buddha said all things are ultimately liberated. Like, that, I mean, Dogen is a Mahayana Buddhist. Like, he does subscribe to the Trikaya. He does have this idea that there is a Buddha nature in things. It just seems to give him problems.
so in that sense, it kind of seems like the common thread really is like going and studying these things yourself, right?
Yeah.
And reflecting on the mountains, on the mother and the child, on the water, but sort of like aligned with what other people were saying. It's not reflecting upon them from your perspective, but reflecting upon them from its perspective, rather than just being, I guess, self-absorbed in your own perspective. You have to study what theirs is.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that's pretty good because it also goes back to part of the answer we gave for Isaac's question last week. And actually, were you the one who gave the answer to the question? Or was it, I think it was Hash maybe. But Isaac's question about, look, if we're not all awakened bodhisattvas, how do we decide if we kill Hitler or not? And I think it was Hash who started to give the answer of like, well, maybe it's at least partly the gradual, imperfect application of the idea that everything is interrelated and that the things that I feel, I'm feeling them from a particular point of view and that from another point of view. And it sounds like so stupid and banal and obvious to just be like, you should think about other points of view. But like, I mean, in a Christian context, you'd say like, what's the Christian ethical team? Like, you should love people. Oh, you're great, you should love people. But like, when you actually think about what that means, and you actually try to put it in practice, and you actually try to come up with like the theoretical grounding for it, it's incredibly complicated. The same thing with this, like thinking about other perspectives. Okay, yeah, think about other perspectives. Yeah, good luck. Like, try actually doing that in your day-to-day experience and see what happens. Yeah, Ella and then Emma and Wes. And then, is someone else? Okay. All right, whatever.
With the whole like anti-perspectives thing and enlightenment, like, this is probably not the answer, but I'm gonna throw it out there, so why not? I love that they use the moon so much, and this happened in Zen Buddhism too.
Well, this is still Zen.
And this is still Zen, yeah. Or with the whole idea of like the moon being like a reflection of light. And I've talked a little bit about this, about how like cosmologically and like astrologically, astronomically, oh my god, the moon quite literally reflects the light of the sun. But we have like different moons that are different colors. We have super moons, we have waning moons, we have waxing moons, right? Full moons, new moons. And so it's not that the moon itself is changing, it's just that our perspective of it is. So in an enlightenment way, is it just that you're not necessarily reflecting like a specific, is it not that you're fully either cognizant of the moon as one thing and that you're only reflecting, you're still enlightened because you're still like, you know, you're still part of everything and you're still enlightened, but you're not just cognizant.
let me rephrase and tell me if I'm hearing you.
Okay.
Or does anyone else want to rephrase? Like, I don't need to be the one
I
to
have a
talk.
question.
I'm like totally losing my voice. Mark's was hard today, y'all. That was a banger of a lecture. Yeah.
I have a little bit of a question because, we were talking about the Middle Ages here, like astronomy and astrology were like one and the same. So I don't think that everyone would have considered the moon as reflecting the sun's light, because how would they conceptualize that working?
Wow.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah, and what did I tell you the other week when you asked me that?
I don't know.
I think
Well, you told
it
me
was
like,
wearing
yes,
nicer
that it
clothes
was-
than that.
I'm sorry,
I think what I said was,
missed
yeah, I
that.
mean, that's a historical claim about a particular point in scientific development, right? Like, we'd have to go back and see what did astronomical sciences, such as they
Yeah, I
were,
guess you said possible.
actually look like in Japan at that time.
Yeah, so
Like,
that's
were
really
there
helpful for me
people
personally. Thank
saying that the moon reflects the light of the sun? Like, that's research. That's what historians and philosophers of science do. Like, this is a question we could answer. But the historical veracity of the question aside,
Yeah, sorry.
let me see if I understand the metaphor question you're asking. That,
Yeah.
okay, so the moon, what does the moon do? Oh, the moon shines, right? It illuminates, it radiates light. On the other hand, it doesn't do any of that. It's just stealing light from the sun and reflecting it back. The moon is kind of like a mirror, right?
Yeah.
That the moon is just reflecting things. And how is it able to do that? Well, it's able to do that because it's not reflecting its own light. It's just borrowing the light from somebody else. And so it exists in this kind of yes, but also no sort of space. And the question is, is enlightenment, or is the state of nirvana something similar? Is that the question?
No.
Okay, then what's the question? I'm missing it then, help me.
So the question is more so like, if it is giving a true, accurate reflection, like not popping its own light, it's giving an accurate reflection of other things, but sometimes it looks different, and it's not really giving a true reflection of all things, right? It's only giving a reflection of, well, the moon is like in a waning state. It is not the full moon right now, but the moon itself is a full thing. So right now you're only seeing part of the true everything.
Yeah, that's not a question though.
I guess I'm just asking for validation.
What an amazing thought. Well done.
Not my job.
And someone to like bounce off of that and like,
Mine
Yes.
kind of goes along with that. Let me see,
You seem to be positing the moon as a separate object from the sun too.
Well, so, yeah. So I started with the question of like, can effort contaminate the end process? And I
Yeah.
thought of, and I like the point that that we have a limited point of view. Let me organize my thoughts. So, and then I thought of how a lot of the Shaolin and the Zen masters go for like, or go against monks and like anybody who really like dives in and like intellectualizes like the experience of anything. They really go for like experiencing things.
Yeah,
And so,
Zen has a kind of anti-theoretical impulse.
and so this is why I really like the imagery of mountains, because when I think of mountains, when I'm in the mountains, it's like you're staring at everything, but a mountain isn't just like just a lump of dirt or trees or anything. It contains all of it, and rivers and bugs and birds live there. And also like on the 4th of July, we were watching fireworks from a park, and we were right by Provo, like the Y. We saw the people who had hiked the Y, and there were a bunch of little like light flashlights. I'm like, there are a bunch of little people up there, but it just looks like a mountain. And also I really like the idea of like stars and like the cosmos and all of that, because then when I look up at the stars, I'm like, I am so tiny, but from like an ignorant point of view, you could be like, the stars are so tiny, I'm enormous. That's probably what I feel like a lot of Western philosophy might have done, like very earth-centric. And so, I don't know, I really like that imagery. And then, I
I totally see like you're kind of like looking at like the mountains and seeing them as like, oh, it's just a lump of dirt and tree, but like not recognizing that it's the whole thing.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that
all
fits
like
together.
separate things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that kind of brings me to my thought of like mirrors. It's like, I think mirrors are one of the worst inventions of society because when you look at it, you just see your physical self. But when I'm like experiencing the world, I just see everybody else, I don't see myself.
Yeah.
And so, like, and then, but I also like see myself in like little parts of my friends or like little mannerisms or like, just like we all feed into each other. And so that's like everything is interconnected. And I think this is why it's important that we don't take our own like perspective to be the one true perspective, like what people, a lot of people do and have done and like wrote about. And I think that's why they also, like on page 102, it's like you should question everything. Like you should question this matter now. You should pursue this beyond the limit because it really encourages us to like get out of our own perspective and that there are other ways to see this.
Yeah, and that importantly, I mean, the Tiantai thing would also say, it's not that your perspective isn't true. Your perspective is one of all other true
Yeah, all
perspectives.
things are equal.
It's true that the stars are tiny.
Yeah.
From my
Yeah.
perspective, the stars are indeed tiny. And we'll get more into this next week after we've read the time being essay. But I mentioned on Monday that a lot of what Dogen is doing is something that's very phenomenological. Meaning phenomenology is the subfield of philosophy that studies how phenomena show up. So like when something happens to you, what is it like? It's not what is beauty, it's what is it like to experience beauty. Right? That Dogen seems to be more concerned with phenomenology, this idea of what are these experiences actually like. And the Tiantai influences, well, it is phenomenologically true that the stars are tiny. That is how we experience the stars. They're small. We also at the same time experience the sun as small and as enormous. Because if you know anything about the great distance between us and the sun, the fact that the sun is still able to heat Earth is amazing. We are experiencing it as enormous and as very tiny. And they're both equally true, or both equally coherent. Yeah. Wes and Thane, unless there's some, yeah, but yeah, Wes, go ahead.
I feel like for me, this section 13 kind of helps me answer this question, and we've already talked about it, but like,
talk about it
again.
again.
It says, you should know that even though all things are liberated and not tied to anything, they abide in their own phenomenal experience, expression, I mean. And then how it goes on to say, like, you know, human beings see water one way, but that's just a limited human view.
Yep.
That made me think, okay, maybe it means, back to the Tiantai idea again, maybe like incoherently, you know, everyone has Buddha nature, everyone is enlightened, but everyone has, you know, if you're not enlightened, you'll have the limited human view locally, coherently, that you're not enlightened.
Yes.
And you need, so in order to reach that enlightenment, you need to have both, because they're both important. You know, you already have that globally incoherent part, but you need to also have the view that you are locally coherently enlightened. And when it said human view, that just brought me back to like the Eightfold Path. So it's Dogen going back and saying, okay, no, you need to have the right view, you need to have, you know, the right, all of those things. And once you have that, you'll be locally coherently enlightened. And then that is when you reach full enlightenment. And because of that, it's the Eightfold Path, it's kind of gradual. You have to do those things. Does that kind of make sense? Is that?
Well, I don't know about you all. Like, does that make sense to you all?
Yeah,
Makes sense to
right.
me. Yeah, and I mean, this is part of why I suggested for next week, look at that Bodhisattva's 4 methods thing, because that's like, I mean, it's even under this section, it's titled Practical Instructions. It's Dogen saying like, yeah, there's a, you know, all this is well and good, but if I'm a good Zen Buddhist, what do I do tomorrow morning? And yeah, I think that thinking of the Eightfold Path as a way of making things locally coherent is exactly right. And then the theoretical explanation behind that from Tiantai would be what? When you make something locally coherent, what are you also doing?
The opposites, that they rely on each other, so they are.
Globally incoherent.
Yeah, if something is locally coherent, you're making it globally incoherent. And if globally, meaning everything, is incoherent, that means that everything is also equally coherent. And that if provisional and ultimate truth are related or interdependent, that means they are also intersubsumptive. And so any local coherence you make by, say, for example, following the Eightfold Path, turns out to be an expression of ultimate truth. By the way, Hassan is out of town and sent his girlfriend to take notes for him. I'm so sorry.
I like this conversation
That's
so far.
some bullshit.
That's not fair.
Welcome.
Hi.
I thought you didn't look familiar.
This is Zay. Yeah.
This doesn't feel very feminist of him. I wouldn't listen to this.
He really threw you into like quite an odd time to take notes for him.
I literally asked him, hey, can you send me the material that you guys are reviewing for today so I understand it? And he's just like, no. And I'm like, okay, fine, have fun on your flight. Hope you don't die.
In his defense, the material is in a book. So he couldn't give you the book and do the reading for next
But he
week.
could have asked. True. And we would have received.
He also could have asked.
He also just could have sent me pictures.
Real.
That wouldn't have even occurred to me, but yes, that's true. Anyway, hope you're having fun. Yeah. Oh yeah, you were next too. Sorry, Michael. Go ahead, Michael. And then Claire, you haven't talked yet, and we'll do Hash in the chat.
So, not sure how relevant this is, but I think it's, I personally think it's a really important topic. Okay, so on the topic of look at things from different perspectives, and your response to that being, oh, good luck. Well, it reminds me of something I've thought a lot about, specifically with the whole idea of the human ability to see things from other perspectives, and also the human ability to operate logically.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, I've observed some very frequent unfortunate behaviors from the average layman, especially online. And,
oh, wow.
Hey,
Nobody's a normal human online.
When someone's online, they're showing their true selves.
Ew. I don't like that idea. Yeah, I don't like that idea at all.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
I don't know about that.
I think it's kind of
They
related.
don't have a fear of being judged. I kind of agree.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of a mixed
Yeah.
bag.
Has anyone ever, has someone written a term paper on like the reverse ring of Gyges effect on the internet?
Real.
The reverse ring of Gyges?
Yeah. Plato has you put
What
the,
is
you could,
that?
it's the ring, right? Like, you
Oh.
put the ring on and be invisible and nobody would hold you responsible. Would you still be good or not?
Yeah. Well, some people would and some people wouldn't. That's my concern. But basically, okay, here's what the point I'm trying to make. Okay, so humans seem to, in one of my past philosophy classes, we talked about how the professor told us that people just have a tendency to be able to see the flaws in other people's beliefs and ideologies, but not really see those in their own.
Sure.
That's something if you observe that with people, you may come to the conclusion that you are a rational person and other people are not. But most likely, you are just simply being a hypocrite. You are simply being able to see other people's flaws, but not your own.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I'm actually suspicious of people who say, I think rationally, I make rationality the primary focus of my life. I think that 999 out of 1,000 times, what that person is really saying is, I'm not smart enough to see other people's points of view. So you know, I think that the whole idea of Buddhists actually bringing this up, I think that's very profound because, well, yeah, aren't they just pointing out that, you know, it really is a difficult thing for us to do, to see things from other people's perspectives, to consider the logic of beliefs that we ourselves do not hold?
Yeah, I think you're right. And to take it one step further, that then Buddhism, or at least Mahayana Buddhism, says not only consider that there's another perspective, but consider the fact that your perspective depends on their perspective. And that your perspective actually becomes meaningless without their perspective.
Yeah.
And then Tiantai, even further, your perspective is their perspective.
You know, one example I'll bring up, although, I hope this doesn't offend you, Professor. I got responded to by a Marxist online who made this absolutely ridiculous claim. Well, for one, okay, he made a lot of ridiculous claims, but the first one was,
You've got like 45 seconds left.
that Marxism has never failed. It has succeeded every single time with no bad repercussions whatsoever in every country it's been tried. And he made at the end the claim that Marxism is to politics what science is to religion. And my whole internal response to that was, yeah, you're just not smart enough to see how other people could have logical perspectives in their own ideologies. You're just so narrow-minded that you can only see the logic of Marxism and nothing else.
Maybe the first one.
My Reddit handle. Now everybody knows. Claire, go ahead.
Okay, sorry,
I can also punt to Hash or Alicia first.
that threw me for a loop, but I'm back.
Okay.
This is going back to more along what David and Emma was saying, and Wes, I think. I'm kind of trying to like bring it together, both with passage 13 and then at the very end of the Mountain and Water Sutra. It sounds really confusing what he's saying here, because he's saying there's like mountains and mountains, and there's mountains and hiddenness, and then the very last line is such mountains and waters of themselves become wise persons and sages.
Yeah.
But if you look up at 21, he says that when you investigate the flowing of a handful of water and not the not flowing of it, full mastery of all things is immediately present. So it's kind of like you get the Tiantai part of it, where it's like everything is everything. So water is flowing and it's not moving, and you know, water is a palace to a dragon and it's also flowing to us. And that is like kind of everyone is enlightened in that sense, where it's like it's that realization is available, and like all those different perspectives. I am trying to see what's kind of, I'm trying to like really get the whole roundabout view of this, because I feel like we've said a few things that have tied into what Dogen is saying with how a person can be enlightened and not act like it.
Yes.
And is it that perspective of seeing both mountains flowing and mountains not flowing? Both it's the non-thinking part of it. It's the thinking and not thinking, but it's the non-thinking. You know, you realize and you understand that mountains are flowing, that they are walking, but they're also very still to you. You can try and maybe make that anything coherent.
No, that's good. This would be another like good exam question, right? So we talked about how for Dogen there's thinking, and this is what Claire was just referencing, right? There's thinking, there's not thinking. And that these two for Dogen are often sort of opposite sides of the same coin. And then there's non-thinking, which for Dogen is categorically different, right? One question would be, how does this relate to, maybe the answer is it doesn't, but how does this relate to, say, the three truths from Tiantai? Because you probably wouldn't want to just graph the three truths onto it, right? Because these two both seem to be part of the provisional truth, right? Claiming things or negating things. And then we've got the center truth and the ultimate or the empty truth. So if those two are both part of provisional, and I don't even know if we like that, we don't have to agree with that. But if those two are both like kind of provisional, then does non-thinking line up with emptiness? Or does non-thinking line up with center? And if it lines up with one of them, does the other one have a corollary? Or is this just a stupid question? It might just be a stupid question, except Dogen was a Tiantai for a while. So like, that, for example, would be a good final exam question. I don't know, what do you think, Claire?
Well, wouldn't it be that from a Tiantai perspective, the center would be thinking, not thinking, and non-thinking all as one?
Yeah, that's one answer. David, what were you gonna say?
Well, that was a better answer than mine. I was just gonna suggest that, like, since historically Chan Buddhism was the two truths for Buddhism, and Dogen sort of converts to it, maybe Dogen abandons the center.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are both good answers, right? That all the Chan Buddhism we looked at in China was all very much the two truths model, right? There's provisional truth, and if you go clean your rice bowl, that seems provisional, but then suddenly you'll arrive at ultimate truth. But now, yeah, maybe you see here like there's a kind of influence from the Tiantai. There's, yeah, wow, that's not a terrible answer. Did you have your hand up just on this? Yeah. Yeah. You've been getting talked at. Go ahead.
I think Dogen would probably align more with the ultimate truth for non-thinking, because he definitely believes that like Zazen is a thing that you can do to achieve the state of enlightenment. And so like if there's two different states, then it seems to align more with the two truths model.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, the way that we're conceptualizing these, is this mountain moving or not moving? It's both simultaneously. That sort of lines up more with the center truth more than it does with moving. So I think that he kind of combines the ultimate truth. He reestablishes it as the ultimate truth, but he establishes the so-called center truth as the ultimate truth in this kind of way.
Okay.
Because I don't really think that he's getting rid of that idea entirely. Because he's
getting rid of which idea entirely?
Of the center truth, like the both simultaneously.
Yeah.
Because he does quote Nagarjuna. I don't know where I read Nagarjuna's quote, but he does quote Nagarjuna, so he is aware of that emptiness idea, but he seems to be sort of reestablishing the ultimate truth versus conventional truth hierarchy.
You think Dogen is reestablishing?
He is kind of reestablishing it, because I read some of the practical instruction today as well. And right here, those who have studied sutras a long time and those who are accomplished in secular tests all should study at the Zen monastery.
Yeah.
So it's so there's provisional truths in the world, and one can study this, but one should be studying at the Zen monastery, which kind of, I think, says that he believes that Zen, the things established by Zen, are the ultimate truth versus all of these.
Now see, if this were a paper, that would be the part you have to prove. Right? You might be right, but I would just like, that's the claim that you'd have to then defend. That like, okay, Dogen says everybody should study the Zen monastery, yes. Now from there, how do you prove your conclusion that therefore Dogen believes in a two truths model? That would be the part you'd have to defend. It may follow. You may be right, but that would be, for example, Mike Shaw. That would be a great paper. Yeah, Wes, and then we're going to go back to Hash and Laisha's questions.
I feel like maybe you just can't map these to each other.
That's fair too. I was just pulling this out of my
yeah.
ass. So.
But if you can, I think, yeah, you kind of have to combine emptiness and center, because like on 102, a bit more in the middle, where after he talks about the different forms water can take, when he says the ultimate realm has 1,000 kinds and 10,000 ways, I feel like that's kind of, saying 1,000, 10,000, that's just saying like infinite.
Yeah, it is.
And so he's just saying the ultimate realm or ultimate truth has all of the separate provisional truths in it, which is just center truth, kind of.
Okay.
Right, so he's saying the ultimate truth, or maybe just the right truth, is that all of the truths are right and empty, which sounds like just the center truth. Is that making any sense?
Omnicentrism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Clearly, I don't know. I'm just, yeah. Ash, or did you want one more?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
This is,
No, go ahead.
Because I definitely think this whole section that we've been focusing on has a lot of Tendai influence. I don't want to say it's like always rejecting Tyler, but I just think it seems to me in this section he's saying, you should stop seeing the world the way a human sees it and see the world the way a Buddha sees it. And that doesn't seem like, because with Tentai the idea was, well, wherever you start from is fine because it's all ultimately just true. And he seems to not be saying that. It seems like he's saying any limited perspective is false. And that seems to not be what Tentai would say. But I don't know, maybe I'm misreading it.
Okay, I'm gonna push back on it actually.
Okay.
Well, okay, this is, my thoughts tied back to this, the anti-theoretical impulse that we mentioned earlier. because this is the thing that is most striking to me about reading Dogen, is that he does seem to like really be pushing for praxis and like going out in nature, and he's like, I will only talk about rocks and trees. Like,
What shape should your cushion be?
Exactly.
Circular.
Right, and we know that because he took the time to say it. Like,
Yeah. But I guess I'm trying to connect that with what we're, well, first of all, I'm having a hard time theorizing about his theories that, because he's, you know, pushing against it. But as I'm trying to like boil down what the connection would be between the theoretical analysis of what he's doing and this impulse, is he trying to kind of put things back in their place? That's the impression that I'm getting. Like, almost as if Tian Tai broke things a little bit by trying to take up this theoretical perspective about perspectives. And maybe what he's trying to do is, if we were to put it in terms of local and global coherence, is he's trying to say, you have your local coherence of you, and I'm going to affirm this, but I'm going to stop trying to do the Tian Tai thing and pretend there's ultimateness that like is going to be coherent in that. Does that make sense? Apparently,
ask her.
I don't know if I necessarily agree, because on 106 in 20 says, it is not only that there is water in the world, but there is a world in water. It's not just water. And then he says there's a world of sentient beings and like multiple things, like clouds and air and fire. And he says basically that we should just like investigate or like examine the meaning of everything. But he's still like affirming that there are things, but then also there's a world in things, and we live in a world where there are like, does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, does section 20, I'm watching me put words in Corinne's mouth. Section 20 seems very Tian Tai.
It does, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Fair? Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that he is Tian Tai, because other sections, as other people have pointed out, seem like they might be pushing for a more two truths. But like, that one sounds pretty Tian Tai.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the answer might just be that like Dogen is a syncretist philosopher, that like you're gonna see traces of all of these. And then the question of, okay, but what was Dogen himself trying to do? That's a way harder question to answer. Leisha, you had your hand up way back when, and then maybe Keaton?
Yeah, so this idea of like trying to see other perspectives.
Yeah.
Would that, two things, first of all, would that be like getting to that point, would that be considered enlightenment?
I think a bodhisattva is someone who has the ability, and a Buddha certainly, is someone who has the ability to see all the different perspectives at once. That's the general Mahayana view. So yeah, if you were at the point where you could do that simultaneously, you would be either an enlightened Buddha or a bodhisattva who could become enlightened but is choosing to be here and help us instead. Yes?
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I feel like with perspectives, I don't understand how you can adequately take on someone else's perspective, because even if I'm like learning about what someone else believes, I'm still, and even if I start to agree with them, I'm still seeing it through my own perspective. Because everything is based on, you know, my experience in my life.
What about when you see a really, really, really beautiful like landscape sunset? Do you have just like 20 seconds where you're not thinking about yourself? Just a moment of like, oh wow, where you're not thinking about the text you gotta reply and the bill you have to pay and the thing you gotta do. You just have a moment of like, oh. A moment of, if we, I mean, this might be too much, but a moment of selflessness. Maybe? You don't have to answer that, but.
I just feel like it would still be affected, like what I would consider beautiful. So if I would even stop to admire it, is affected by like what I believe in my past.
Okay. Dogen will have something to say about that next week. Where he'll talk about sort of the formation of personalities and how that happens.
But is there such a person that doesn't find a sunset like that beautiful?
I think I could find one.
maybe that's my.
We go on the internet. We find one there. Keaton, go ahead. Have the last word.
But how?
I tell that person say that I kind of agree with Tash a little bit, and as far as this is what you were saying at least. He doesn't out of theoretics at all, but more about the practice to like see theoretics yourself, right? And like Corinne did point out, like obviously he is making claims, like I don't think he's avoiding that necessarily.
Yeah.
But at the end of those claims, he's always like, you should thoroughly examine this yourself. And so I think like the focus is like, each one of you just go experience it, think about it, or like non-think about it.
We'll see how you guys feel about this whole non-theoretical thing after you read Time Being.